It was just another typical Monday morning in the small town of Willowbrook, where Alex Carter, a 42-year-old mid-level executive at a local company, woke up to the sound of his alarm. Like any other workday, he started his morning with a cup of coffee, a quick check of the news, and a brief chat with his wife, Sarah, as she prepared breakfast for their teenage daughter. The rhythm of his life was predictable, steady, and comfortable. Nothing extraordinary ever seemed to happen in this quiet corner of the world. Alex had worked at Langdon Enterprises for the last 15 years. The company, owned by the mysterious billionaire Charles Langdon, had always been a steady source of employment in Willowbrook. The Langdon family was well known, but few people really understood the power and reach they held. Charles Langdon himself was a figure shrouded in secrecy, a business magnate whose personal life was as guarded as his financial empire. Alex admired his boss for his business acumen, but he had always remained at arm's length from the Langdon family's inner circle. He knew his place, content with his steady salary and the simple life he had built with Sarah and their daughter, Emma. That morning, as Alex walked into the office, he noticed the usual tension in the air. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet that signaled something was amiss. His secretary, Emily, was already at her desk, typing away as she glanced up and offered a polite smile. Emily had been with Langdon Enterprises for several years, and Alex had always appreciated her professionalism and efficiency. She was bright, capable, and dedicated, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the office. She greeted Alex with her usual warmth, but there was an edge to her demeanor today, something unspoken. At 10 a.m., just as Alex was settling into his usual routine, he received a call from Charles Langdon himself. This wasn't unusual. Charles occasionally checked in with the higher-ups on minor matters. But today was different. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. "Alex," Charles began, his tone measured and deliberate, "I need to speak with you about something important. Could you come to my office?" There was a slight pause before he continued, "It's urgent." Alex, intrigued and slightly apprehensive, agreed to meet Charles in his private office. The Langdon office was unlike any other in the building. Its large windows overlooked the sprawling city, and the sleek, minimalist decor spoke to a wealth that was impossible to ignore. Charles was sitting behind his polished desk, his expression unreadable as Alex entered. As Alex took a seat, the silence between them felt heavy, almost suffocating. Charles finally broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about the future of Langdon Enterprises, Alex," he began, his eyes fixed on Alex with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "We need to ensure the next generation is ready to lead. I have a plan, but it requires a delicate favor." Alex's mind raced. What could he possibly mean? Charles had always been a man of few words, and everything he said had a purpose. Alex leaned forward, intrigued but cautious. "I need a child," Charles said, almost as if the words were insignificant. "A child who will carry on the Langdon legacy. I want Emily to bear this child, and I need you to help facilitate this." Alex's heart skipped a beat. The request was so outlandish, so unexpected, that for a moment, he thought he might have misheard. I don't understand," Alex stammered, struggling to keep his composure. "You want Emily to?" "Yes," Charles interrupted, his voice steady. "I've thought this through. Emily is the perfect candidate. She's young, healthy, and intelligent. The child will inherit the Langdon intellect and be groomed to take the reins of the company in the future. All I need from you is to convince her." Alex felt his pulse quicken. He looked over at Emily, who had always been the model employee, but the idea of her carrying Charles's child, there was something about it that felt wrong, even unnatural. But as he met Charles's gaze, Alex realized that this wasn't a request, it was an ultimatum. Charles continued, explaining that the child would be raised under his control, ensuring it would inherit not just the family wealth but the power and influence needed to run Langdon Enterprises one day. There was no room for refusal. Alex could see the steely determination in his boss's eyes, the same look he had seen when Charles made decisions that affected millions. The proposition was staggering, and Alex's mind raced. How could he even begin to process what Charles was asking of him? And what about Emily? What would she say? Alex felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He had always done his best to support Charles, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. The conversation ended with Charles's calm instruction, "You'll speak with Emily. Make it happen, Alex. I'm counting on you." As Alex walked back to his office, his mind was in turmoil. His life, his family's future, and his very moral compass were all at stake. Could he really ask Emily to take part in such a twisted arrangement? And if she refused, what would happen to his career, his family? The weight of it all pressed down on him, and for the first time, he questioned everything about his life, his loyalty, and the price of power. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Alex could barely focus on the tasks in front of him, his mind continually drifting back to the conversation with Charles. What would he say to Emily? How could he even begin to explain such an impossible request to her? As the hours ticked by, Alex felt the walls of his world closing in, and he knew that whatever choice he made next would change everything. The evening after his conversation with Charles, Alex sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the half-eaten meal in front of him. Sarah, his wife, noticed the tension in his face immediately. "Alex, what's wrong? You've hardly touched your food." He hadn't been himself since he came home, and it was clear something was troubling him. Alex hesitated for a moment, wondering how he could explain the impossible request that had been thrust upon him. How could he share this with her without sounding insane? Yet, he knew he had no choice but to talk about it. He needed someone to understand, someone who could offer him perspective. "Sarah, I've been asked to do something I never thought I'd be asked," Alex began, his voice strained. "Charles Langdon wants me to help him, to make sure Emily, our secretary, has his child." Sarah's fork clattered onto the plate, her eyes widening in shock. She stared at him for a long moment, clearly unsure if he was joking or if he had lost his mind. "What? What do you mean, have his child? Why? How? This doesn't make any sense." Alex let out a long, weary sigh and ran his hands through his hair. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't know the details, but Charles believes that Emily is the perfect candidate to carry this child. He says it's for the future of the company, that this child will be the next heir to Langdon Enterprises. He says the child will be raised under his control, prepared to take over the company when the time is right." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she processed the information. She was a pragmatic woman, and this sounded nothing short of absurd. "And you agreed to this? You're going to ask Emily to do this?" Her voice was a mixture of disbelief and concern. "I haven't agreed to anything yet," Alex responded, his tone heavy with uncertainty. "But Charles is serious. He's made it clear that this isn't a request I can turn down. He said that if I want to keep my position, I need to make this happen." Sarah shook her head, her voice rising with frustration. "This is insane, Alex. How can you even consider this? What about Emily? What about her life? You can't just ask her to do something like this. It's wrong." Alex felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He knew she was right. He had thought about Emily's feelings, too. Emily was a kind and intelligent woman, a friend even, someone he'd worked with for years. She had always been professional and respectful, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Asking her to bear Charles's child felt like a violation of her autonomy, a manipulation of her body for a purpose Alex couldn't fully comprehend. But the pressure from Charles was mounting, and Alex couldn't ignore it. He had always been loyal to Charles, and the thought of losing his job, his position at Langdon Enterprises, was a fear he couldn't shake. The thought of losing everything he had worked for, a stable life, his family's future, made it hard to think clearly. "I don't know what to do, Sarah. I'm stuck. If I don't do this, if I don't convince Emily to go along with it, I'll lose everything. I can't just walk away from this. But if I do agree, I'll be complicit in something I can't even begin to understand. What if I'm making the wrong choice? He sat back in his chair, burying his face in his hands, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Sarah reached out and placed a hand on his, her voice softer now. "You don't have to make this decision alone. We'll figure this out, but you need to think long and hard about what's best for all of us. For you, for me, for Emily. This isn't just about keeping your job, it's about who you want to be, what kind of person you want to be. Don't let fear make this decision for you." Alex nodded slowly, appreciating Sarah's words. But the fear was still there, gnawing at him. The fear of losing everything he had worked so hard for, the fear of crossing a line he couldn't uncross. He had always played it safe, always kept his head down, and worked hard to support his family. But now, in the face of Charles's request, it felt like everything was about to unravel. The next day, Alex couldn't shake the sense of dread that hung over him. He had no choice but to speak with Emily. The thought of asking her to carry Charles's child was absurd, almost offensive. But the pressure to comply with Charles's wishes was suffocating. Alex walked into the office early, hoping to catch Emily before the day's chaos began. She was sitting at her desk, typing up reports, her usual calm demeanor in place. But when she looked up and saw the seriousness on his face, she knew something was wrong. "Alex? Is everything okay?" she asked, her tone laced with concern. Alex took a deep breath. "Emily, I need to talk to you about something. It's really important." He motioned for her to follow him into the small conference room down the hall. The door clicked shut behind them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Alex could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of the situation, pressing down on him. "Emily," he began, his voice low and hesitant. "Charles has made a request. He wants you to have his child." Emily's expression shifted, a mix of confusion and disbelief crossing her face. "What are you talking about? Why would he want that?" Alex swallowed hard, struggling to find the words. "I don't know, but he says that the child will be the future of Langdon Enterprises, that he wants to create an heir who can take over the company. He thinks you're the right person to carry the child." There was a long, tense silence as Emily processed the information. Her face paled, and Alex could see the shock in her eyes. "That's insane. I don't understand. Why would he want me?" "Why me?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. "I don't know," Alex replied. "But it's not just about you, Emily. It's about me, too. Charles said if I don't help him, if I don't make this happen, I'll lose my job. Everything I've worked for, everything I've built, will be gone." Emily shook her head, clearly struggling with the enormity of what Alex was asking. "This is beyond anything I can even imagine, Alex. I don't know what to say." Alex felt his stomach twist as he realized just how much he had put Emily in the middle of this. She was a part of this dilemma now, and there was no easy way out. He couldn't force her to make this choice, but he knew the consequences of her refusal. In the silence that followed, he waited, hoping she could find a way to make sense of this madness. I need time to think," Emily said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She stood up and left the room, leaving Alex to grapple with the choices that had already begun to spiral out of control. Alex stood there for a long moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this was just the beginning. No matter what Emily decided, things would never be the same again. And as he watched her walk away, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. The following days were a blur for Alex, each moment consumed by the weight of the decision hanging over him. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting back to that conversation with Charles and the discussion he'd had with Emily. It was as if his life had been put on pause, suspended in a state of uncertainty. He would catch himself staring out of his office window, watching the hustle and bustle of the world go by, but feeling completely detached from it. Everyone else seemed to move forward with their lives, but Alex felt stuck, trapped between loyalty to his boss and the ethical dilemma that was slowly tearing him apart. Emily hadn't spoken to him since their conversation, and Alex knew that, just like him, she was grappling with the enormity of the situation. He had tried to reach out to her, but each time he did, she pulled away, her responses terse and distant. He didn't blame her, after all, he had essentially dragged her into a nightmare she never asked for. But the silence was killing him, gnawing at him as he wondered what was going through her mind. Would she go through with it? Would she refuse? And if she did, what would that mean for his job, for his family's future? It was on a particularly gloomy Friday afternoon that Alex finally received the call he had been dreading. Charles had summoned him to his office again, and the tone in his voice left no room for hesitation. "Alex, I need you here now," he said. The urgency in his words was unmistakable. Alex knew there would be no avoiding this meeting, no further delaying the inevitable. He closed his laptop, stood up from his desk, and took a deep breath before heading towards Charles's office. When Alex entered, Charles was already seated behind his desk, his expression unreadable as usual. The office felt colder today, more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in around him. Charles looked up and gestured for him to sit. "I trust you've spoken to Emily?" he asked, his voice smooth but firm. Alex nodded, though he had no idea what Emily's answer would be. "I've spoken to her," Alex replied cautiously, trying to read Charles's face. "She's processing everything. It's a lot for anyone to take in." Charles raised an eyebrow, clearly not satisfied with that answer. "I don't care about her processing. I care about results. I need a decision, Alex. Time is running out." There was a sharpness to Charles's words that sent a chill down Alex's spine. He could feel the pressure mounting, the invisible hand of authority bearing down on him with each passing moment. "I understand," Alex muttered, trying to steady his breathing. "But this isn't something you can just force, Charles. It's not that simple." Charles leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking with Alex's. "Don't lecture me about simplicity. You know what's at stake here, don't you? This isn't just about the future of Langdon Enterprises, it's about ensuring our legacy. The child will secure our family's control over everything we've built. Emily is just a means to that end. You need to convince her. I've given you all the tools you need to make this happen. Don't let me down." Alex felt his stomach churn. The reality of what he was hearing hit him with full force. I can't just make her do this, Charles," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "This is a human being we're talking about, not some pawn in a business strategy. You can't force someone into something like this." Charles's lips curled into a cold smile. "I'm not asking you to force her, Alex. I'm asking you to make her see reason. You've worked with her for years. You know how to get through to her. If you can't handle this, then perhaps you're not the right person for the job." Alex felt his pulse quicken as he realized how close he was to crossing a line. He had always been a loyal employee, but this was something different. This wasn't just about corporate loyalty anymore, it was about integrity, about his very soul. The decision that loomed before him felt impossible. He looked at Charles, the man who had built an empire with sheer will and determination, and yet he saw no trace of empathy in his eyes. It was as if Emily was nothing more than a tool in his grand design. "I'll talk to her again," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper, as he stood up. "But Charles, I need you to understand, I'm not sure I can convince her. And if she refuses, I won't be the one to make that choice for her." Charles said nothing in response, but his gaze bore into Alex like a weight pressing down on his chest. It was clear that Charles's patience was wearing thin, and Alex knew that time was running out. As he left Charles's office, Alex felt the crushing weight of the decision bearing down on him. He had never been this close to the edge before, never felt so completely trapped in a situation with no easy way out. He didn't know how much longer he could keep up this facade of compliance, this pretension that he could still go along with Charles's plan. His thoughts turned to Emily, to the woman he had known for so long. What was she thinking now? Would she understand the pressure he was under, or would she see him as just another part of the system, another cog in the wheel of Charles's ambitions? That evening, Alex went home and tried to distract himself with family life. Sarah had noticed that something was off, but he couldn't bring himself to talk about it just yet. Instead, he watched as she prepared dinner and talked about Emma's upcoming school play. It was as if he were living in two different worlds, the one with his family, where life was still simple and pure, and the one at the office, where every decision now carried the potential to destroy everything he held dear. But in the midst of this, one thought kept gnawing at him: if he didn't do something soon, everything would unravel. He couldn't continue to live this way, constantly torn between duty and morality. Something had to give. The next day, after yet another sleepless night, Alex called Emily into his office. He had to make one final attempt to change her mind, to try and convince her that this wasn't the right path for her. As she walked in, Alex could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the same way he felt. She had been avoiding him for days, and now it was time to face the truth. "Emily," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I need you to understand, I'm not asking you to do this because I want to. But Charles is relentless. If you refuse, it's not just my job that's at stake, it's our futures. It's everything we've worked for. Please, just think about it." Emily stood silent for a moment, her gaze distant. Then, in a voice barely audible, she spoke, "I've been thinking, Alex. About everything. And I don't know what to do anymore." The silence between them was deafening, and Alex realized that this moment would define everything. The decision Emily made now would change the course of their lives, and perhaps the entire town of Willowbrook, forever. The silence in the office stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Alex sat across from Emily, his hands clenched into fists, heart pounding. He could see the conflict written all over her face, the inner turmoil she was trying to hide. Her eyes, usually so calm and composed, were clouded with doubt and fear. She was trying to make sense of everything, trying to decide whether to take the path that Charles had laid out before her, or to stand firm and walk away. Alex knew that this decision was one she didn't deserve to make. She hadn't asked for any of this. And yet, here she was, caught in the web of ambition and control that Charles had spun, a mere pawn in his high-stakes game. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through the tension like a knife. "I don't know if I can do this, Alex. Everything you've said, everything Charles is asking, it's so overwhelming. I've been trying to figure out what's right, but I can't find an answer. This is too much." Alex leaned forward, his voice filled with urgency. "I understand, Emily. I really do. But you have to understand too, if you don't do this, I lose everything. My family, my job, everything I've worked for. Charles won't let me walk away from this. He's made it clear that if I don't convince you, I'm done." Emily's eyes filled with sympathy, but there was also a hardness in them, a resolve that Alex hadn't seen before. She stood up abruptly, walking over to the window and staring out at the bustling city below. Alex watched her, waiting for her to say something, anything that would provide him with some clarity. After a long moment, she turned back to him. "I can't say yes, Alex. I can't just give in to this. I'm not a tool for Charles to use, and I'm not going to carry his child just because he thinks it will secure his legacy. There's more to life than business and power. There's a person behind every decision, and I don't want to be part of something so cold and calculating." Alex's heart sank. He had hoped that Emily would understand the pressure he was under, but now he realized that she was seeing things from a different perspective. She wasn't blinded by fear or ambition, she was thinking with her heart, something he had almost forgotten how to do. "I can't do it either," Alex said softly, almost to himself. "I can't keep going along with this. But I don't know what to do next. I'm trapped, Emily. There's no way out without losing everything." His voice broke, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of the consequences of his situation. Emily looked at him with a mixture of compassion and concern. "You're not trapped, Alex. You just think you are. There's always a choice. It's just harder to see sometimes when everything feels like it's on the line." Her words hit him harder than he expected. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and for the first time, he saw the situation with clear eyes. "You're right," Alex said quietly, his voice tinged with a newfound determination. "I've been so focused on what I might lose that I didn't stop to think about what I might gain by standing up for what's right." The realization was a powerful one. He didn't have to go along with Charles's demands. He didn't have to sacrifice his integrity for the sake of his career. There was another path, even if it wasn't easy, even if it meant losing everything. And maybe, just maybe, losing everything would be the first step toward something better. Over the next few days, Alex and Emily continued to talk in hushed tones, weighing their options, discussing what their next steps could be. They both knew that standing up to Charles would come with consequences, but it felt like the right thing to do. There was something about taking control of their own lives again that felt empowering, like a weight was slowly lifting from their shoulders. They decided they would approach Charles together, make it clear that they wouldn't be coerced into participating in his plan. They would take a stand, even if it meant walking away from Langdon Enterprises forever. On the day of the meeting, Alex felt a knot in his stomach. He had never been one to challenge authority, especially not someone like Charles, who had built an empire on his own terms. But today, there was no turning back. He and Emily walked into Charles's office, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Charles was waiting for them, his usual calm demeanor now replaced by an air of impatience. He didn't even bother to offer them seats, simply motioning to the chairs across from his desk. "I trust you've had time to think, Alex," Charles said, his voice cool but laced with tension. "Have you convinced her?" Alex took a deep breath, his voice steady as he spoke. "No, Charles. I haven't convinced her. And I won't. We've decided we can't be a part of this." There was a long, pregnant silence before Charles's face hardened, his eyes narrowing in anger. "You're making a huge mistake, both of you. You have no idea what you're throwing away." "We know exactly what we're throwing away," Emily said, her voice firm. "But we're not willing to sacrifice our integrity for the sake of your ambitions. You can't just treat people like pawns in your game, Charles. We're not going to be part of that." Charles stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. His hands gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white with fury. "You think you can just walk away from this? You think I won't make sure you regret this decision? You'll both be ruined if you do this, Alex." "I'll make sure of it." But Alex stood his ground. "Maybe we will be ruined, but we'd rather lose everything than lose ourselves." The confrontation felt like a breaking point for Alex. For the first time, he didn't feel the paralyzing fear of losing everything he had worked for. Instead, he felt something else, liberation. He had finally made the choice that was best for him, and for Emily. He had chosen to walk away from the toxic control that Charles exerted over their lives. When they left Charles's office, Alex felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but it wasn't without a cost. As he walked down the hallway, he knew that his decision had irrevocably changed the course of his life. He had chosen the harder path, the one that required courage and conviction, the one that would lead to an uncertain future. But as he glanced at Emily, he saw the same resolve in her eyes, the same determination to take control of her own life. And for the first time in days, Alex felt hope. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change, uncertainty, and, ultimately, growth. Alex and Emily had made their decision, and there was no turning back. The fallout from their confrontation with Charles was immediate and intense, but neither of them had anticipated just how deeply the repercussions would spread. Langdon Enterprises, once the pinnacle of Alex's career, became a distant memory, fading into the background as the couple struggled to navigate their new lives. It wasn't just their professional lives that had been uprooted, their personal worlds, too, had been turned upside down. At first, the shock of their decision was overwhelming. Alex's phone buzzed incessantly with messages from former colleagues and friends, all asking the same question: what happened? No one seemed to understand why he would turn his back on everything he had worked for. But the more Alex tried to explain, the clearer it became that the life he had once lived, the one he had thought was everything, was a facade. He had been chasing the wrong things, and it took this crisis to make him realize just how hollow his success had been. His relationship with Sarah, strained before but now strained even more, took a sharp turn. She didn't understand why Alex would walk away from a life of security, why he would risk everything for something as intangible as moral integrity. The conversations with her became more tense, the gaps between them widening as Alex questioned not just his career but his very values. There were moments when he felt as though he was losing everything, his job, his family, his sense of self, and yet, there were other moments when he felt a strange sense of freedom, as if a weight had been lifted. Emily, too, found herself navigating an entirely new world. She had been working at Langdon Enterprises for almost a decade, and walking away from it all had been an enormous leap. At first, she found herself adrift, unsure of what to do next. The skills she had honed in the corporate world didn't seem to translate easily into the freelance work she attempted. But slowly, with Alex's encouragement, she began to carve out a new path for herself. She took on small projects, using her knowledge and experience to help other businesses streamline their operations. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly didn't come with the prestige that had once been associated with working for Langdon Enterprises, but it was fulfilling in a way that Alex had never seen her be before. She had rediscovered a sense of purpose that had been buried under years of corporate pressure. Despite the initial struggles, there was an undeniable sense of relief in both of them. Alex and Emily had taken back control of their lives, and for the first time in years, they felt like they were living authentically. Alex still found himself questioning whether he had made the right choice, especially in the quiet moments when doubt crept in, like late nights when he lay awake, his mind running over every possible consequence. What if they had made a mistake? What if they were just too stubborn, too idealistic? But as time passed, Alex realized that the life they were building was worth the risk. They had rediscovered the joy of doing things on their own terms. They had learned that life wasn't just about wealth or status, it was about integrity, connection, and the courage to stand up for what mattered. They found themselves spending more time together, not just as colleagues or business partners, but as two people who truly cared about each other's well-being. Their bond grew stronger, the lines between professional and personal blurring as they both invested in their own growth. The community of Willowbrook, too, was undergoing its own transformation. Word of the fallout at Langdon Enterprises had spread, and there were those who viewed Alex's decision as reckless, a foolish gambit that had destroyed a promising future. But there were others who saw it differently. Some admired his courage, the way he had stood up to a powerful corporation and walked away when he realized it wasn't worth losing his soul for. In a small town like Willowbrook, where everyone knew everyone's business, Alex and Emily became the subjects of whispers, of conversations held in hushed tones over dinner tables. Some people supported them, while others couldn't understand what they had done. But even those who criticized them couldn't deny that something had shifted in Willowbrook. The community had seen its share of corruption and corporate greed, but Alex's stand had sparked something. People began to ask themselves hard questions. How far were they willing to go for success? What was truly important in life? And, most importantly, was it possible to live a life of integrity and still succeed? Months went by, and with each passing day, Alex and Emily grew stronger, more certain of their path. They learned that standing up to the powerful forces of the world didn't always mean losing everything, it could mean gaining the most important thing of all, peace of mind. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without sacrifice, but they had rediscovered what it meant to live without compromise. And yet, as the seasons changed and life began to settle into a new rhythm, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that their journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. There were still so many challenges ahead, financial hurdles, personal dilemmas, and the lingering effects of the fallout from Langdon Enterprises. But as he sat with Emily one evening, watching the sunset over the small town they now called home, he realized that none of those challenges mattered as much as the strength they had found in each other. They were no longer bound by fear, by the pressure to conform, by the unrelenting demands of a corporate world that had no place for people like them. They were free. And that freedom, Alex realized, was the greatest success they could ever achieve. With the knowledge they had gained, they began to reach out to others, helping those who felt trapped in the same corporate grind that had once held them captive. They shared their story, not as a tale of failure, but as one of triumph, a triumph over fear, over greed, and over the pressure to live a life that wasn't their own. Slowly but surely, they built a network of like-minded individuals who believed in the power of authenticity, integrity, and community. In time, Alex and Emily became more than just two people who had walked away from a powerful corporation. They became symbols of what could happen when you chose to live by your values, even in the face of unimaginable pressure. They didn't have all the answers, but they knew one thing for certain: by staying true to themselves, they had gained more than they could ever have dreamed of. And as they looked ahead, Alex couldn't help but smile, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together, on their own terms. The months that followed were a true test of Alex and Emily's resolve. They had left behind the corporate world, but it wasn't as if their troubles had disappeared. If anything, the challenge of forging a new life was just beginning. With every passing day, they found themselves navigating uncharted waters, learning things about themselves and each other that they hadn't anticipated. The pressure they had once felt from Langdon Enterprises, had been replaced by the pressures of self-sufficiency, of building something from nothing. Emily, who had once been confined to the structured world of business administration, found herself thriving in the chaos of entrepreneurship. She threw herself into freelance consulting, offering her expertise to small businesses that needed guidance in navigating the complicated corporate landscape. What had started as small gigs turned into bigger contracts, and soon, she was working with a growing number of clients. The work wasn't always glamorous, but Emily found immense satisfaction in knowing that she was helping others avoid the same traps that had ensnared her for so many years. She was beginning to feel a sense of empowerment that she had never experienced before. Alex, on the other hand, struggled at first to find his footing. His expertise in the high-stakes world of Langdon Enterprises didn't easily translate into the world he was now trying to create. At first, the projects he took on were modest, building websites for small startups, offering business advice to friends in need, even dabbling in consulting for local enterprises. But with each project, Alex found himself discovering new parts of his skill set. He had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, but now he was learning the value of humility, of taking the time to help others without the expectation of a quick reward. There were days when they both questioned whether they had made the right choice. Their savings were dwindling, and neither of them had a clear path forward. They were living on a tight budget, cutting back on everything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Emily still had moments of doubt, wondering if she would be able to sustain her new life without the security of a stable corporate job. Alex, too, found himself wondering if he had made a grave mistake, especially when they were forced to turn down work or say no to projects that could have provided the stability they needed. They both knew they were taking a risk, but they didn't know how much longer their resources would hold out. But it was in the midst of this struggle that something unexpected began to happen. The work they were doing, the people they were meeting, and the experiences they were having began to shift their perspective. They had entered this new phase of life with a sense of urgency, driven by the desire to build something solid, something that would prove they hadn't made a rash decision. But as time passed, they realized that success didn't always look the way they had imagined it. It wasn't about the money, the prestige, or the grand gestures. It was about the quiet victories, the small wins that came from helping others, from staying true to their values, and from finding contentment in what they had, rather than always striving for more. Their lives were more fulfilling than they could have ever predicted. They spent more time together, traveling when they could, visiting family, and making memories they would never have had the chance to make if they had stayed in the corporate grind. They were no longer defined by their jobs or their titles. Instead, they were free to explore their passions, to invest in the people and causes that mattered most to them. They started to volunteer at local organizations, giving back to the community that had supported them through their transition. They were no longer isolated in their individual pursuits, they had become part of something larger, something that gave their lives real meaning. The pressure to succeed, which had once felt all-consuming, now felt like a distant memory. They realized that they were living a life they could be proud of, one that was driven by their own desires, not by the expectations of others. They had no illusions about the challenges ahead. They knew that the road to true independence would be long and fraught with setbacks. But they had also learned that the true measure of success wasn't about avoiding failure, it was about how you responded to it. One of the most surprising aspects of this new chapter was how the community of Willowbrook had embraced them. When Alex and Emily had walked away from Langdon Enterprises, they had feared that they would be seen as failures, or that their decision would isolate them from the people who had known them before. But instead, the townspeople respected them. They admired their courage, their willingness to take a leap of faith in the pursuit of something better. Willowbrook, a place known for its quiet charm and close-knit atmosphere, had become a haven for them. They no longer felt the weight of judgment or the need to conform to some corporate ideal. They were finally, truly home. As the months turned into a year, Alex and Emily realized that their journey had been transformative in ways they hadn't fully understood when they first made their decision. They had discovered the power of living authentically, of shedding the weight of societal expectations, and embracing a life that was truly their own. They had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars and cents, it was measured in the richness of their experiences, in the depth of their relationships, and in the satisfaction that came from knowing they were living in alignment with their values. Looking back, Alex and Emily saw that the darkest moments of their lives, the times when they were faced with impossible choices, when they had questioned their decisions, when they had felt lost, had been the moments that had ultimately shaped them into the people they had become. They had been forced to confront their fears, to take risks, and to step into the unknown. And in doing so, they had found a freedom that was beyond anything they had ever imagined. As they sat together one evening, looking out over the small town they had come to love, Alex turned to Emily with a smile. "I never thought we'd get here," he said softly. "I never thought I'd be happy living like this." Emily smiled back, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the sunset. "Me neither," she replied. "But I think we found the right path, even if it wasn't the one we expected." Alex nodded, his heart full. They had walked away from everything they had known, and in doing so, they had found everything they had truly needed. Their story wasn't just about escaping the corporate world or defying a powerful man. It was about rediscovering what it meant to live with purpose, to be true to oneself, and to never stop growing. And as the years went by, they both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them with the same courage and conviction that had brought them this far. Together,